Hi, friends, and welcome to the Autoimmune Mom Podcast. I'm your host, Allie. This is a space for moms navigating life with autoimmune disease, the exhaustion, the guilt, the strength it takes to show up, and the hope that we can still live full, meaningful lives even when our bodies make things harder. Each week, we'll have honest conversations with moms living with autoimmune disease, share practical support, and remind each other we are not alone in this journey. Before we dive in, if this podcast resonates with you, it would mean so much to me if you would follow or subscribe wherever you're listening, leave a review, and share this episode with another mom who needs it. You can also connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at the Autoimmune Mom Podcast, where I share encouragement, resources, updates about new episodes. If you're looking for extra support, you can download my free Autoimmune Mom Survival Guide through the link in my bio. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome, Penny. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited to share with our audience today the owner of Low Country Wellness Center, Penni. She's here to share her autoimmune story and her practice story as well. So without further ado, let's just jump right in. Penni, how are you? Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Super excited. Why don't you start by telling us your autoimmune story first so we can all get a better idea of who you are and how you came to where you are.
So I was a lifelong sickie. And I know so many people can appreciate that, right? I was 10 years old when I was told that I had IBS. At 12, they said it was treatment-resistant IBS and that I would just have to live with it for the rest of my life. And so when you're a digestive person, you go through life knowing the path to every place you need to go, right? You know the good bathroom path and you know the bad bathroom path, right? So I just lived my entire adult life that way. And never gave it any consideration, right? IBS. Mm-hmm. And as I got, a little bit further up in my years, it was, I don't feel good. Like, I know my gut stuff isn't great because of my IBS, but I just don't feel good. Like, I was having migraines, I was having weight gain, I was having all kinds of things. And I went into this vicious migraine cycle that lasted about 7 years. And we tried and failed everything. And the neurologist said, hey, listen, I just think it's tied to your IBS. I don't have a good answer for you. I think you're just going to have migraines like this for the rest of your life that we can't treat. And you're just going to have to figure out how to live with them. And I was like, yeah, I don't love that for me, but I didn't have any other choice, and then it just so happened one day I was in clinic seeing patients and I collapsed and I came to with my husband hovering over me. My staff had called him and he said, you have two options. You can get up with me and go to the hospital on your own, or you can lay on the floor and I'm going to call 911. And I said, well, I'm not dying. And I'm not going to the hospital in an ambulance. So get me up and we'll go. And so got to the hospital. And of course they rushed me back. When you have a certain alphabet soup after your name, things happen a little bit quicker for you. And they came back to me and said, yep, you've got a GI bleed. And I said, oh, I could have told you that. It looked like a massacre every time I went to the bathroom. And so I was just losing so much blood. And they said, well, we got you an emergency appointment tomorrow morning with GI. And I said, beautiful. Great. Thanks. Gave me the meds for the GI bleed for the, to get me through to the next morning. And I go and see GI in the next morning and he says, I think they misdiagnosed you. A, I don't think you have a GI bleed. B, you definitely do not have IBS. I think you have ulcerative colitis. And I was like, that makes way more sense. Oh my gosh, right? Ding, ding, ding. All the lights started to go off. And he said, but more importantly, can we talk about the large adrenal tumor you have? And that one floored me. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, oh, they didn't tell you. No, sir, they most certainly did not tell me. And he said, yeah, I'm more concerned about that than I am about anything in your digestive tract. I can fix that. And I was like, beautiful. And he said, well, because you are who you are, normally I would never get involved in this, but I'm going to go ahead and let's get some orders going. Let's get an MRI and do some other things for the adrenal. And I was like, great, love that. Yeah, let's dive in. He said, please go see your PCP, bring her up to speed. Perfect, made an appointment. So all of that was Tuesday morning. I saw my PCP the next day, Wednesday.
Wow.
This was March 7th of 2018, 8 years ago. We're right there.
Wow.
And I saw her and she walked into the room and I was so weak I couldn't drive. So my mom drove me and she walked into the room crying, holding her tablet. And she said, which hospice agency do you want?
Oh my God.
And I said, what? And she said, well, you clearly have adrenal cell carcinoma. Adrenal cancer. And I said, how do we know that? What are you talking about? She said, well, I looked at the scan. I saw how big it is and I saw how much dye it took up. And I said, okay, but inflammation will cause dye uptake. And I was having
Yeah.
I'm trying to ration while my mother's hysterical next to me that her
I'm
only
sure.
daughter is dying. And I said, listen, I think you and I are on different pages of where my body is, and I got to get out of here. And I turned to my mom. I said, come on, let's go. I can't be here. And, she followed me out and she was like, no, let me talk to you. Let me talk. I said, no, we're done. We're done. I can't talk to you. You've just doomsdayed me, and I don't need people like that on my side. Right. I
Well,
needed you to
and
come in and say,
how to
go
give
ahead.
someone news. I mean,
Right.
that
Exactly. Well, and
is
that's,
the
and I
most,
know that, it was a provider to provider thing, right?
but it doesn't matter. You're
But
human.
still, and that's what I said to her. I said,
Yeah.
you only treated me as if I was your peer and not as if I was a person, right? At the first and foremost, I'm a person. I'm a
Right.
patient. I'm seeing you as a patient, not as my colleague. And so I went home and, dove into the research and said, I'm going to make some diet changes, right? UC is a big diagnosis. I need to make some drastic diet changes. So implemented diet changes right away. Well, we waited for my colonoscopy and my EGD to get scheduled. And in an MRI, he needed me to get some other inflammatory things done before we could jump into all of that. So that bought me about a 3-week window of, I don't really know what's going on with my adrenal tumor. I don't really know what's going on with my digestion. The bleeding had stopped, so that was a saving grace. And so the end of March came and we got the scans and we got the colonoscopy EGD done. And I'll never forget when I went in for the follow-up, the first thing he said when he walked in the room, my mom brought me, and he said, boy, was I wrong. And he said, thankfully, you don't have UC. You don't have any type of lower digestive disease. What you do have, though, is the worst celiac disease I've ever seen in a body.
Wow.
He said, your celiac created so much inflammation that it caused your intestines to bleed. And then this light bulb went off in my mind. And I said, I have complained for over a decade to my providers about this one focal spot of pain in my upper abdomen that felt like a hot electric poker searing into my abdomen. And the answer was always, well, it's your IBS. And so he said, point to where? And I showed him, and he said, that's exactly where the hole in your intestines is.
Unbelievable.
And so that was, the colonoscopy predated the MRI, I think, by a few days. And we got the MRI back, and it was like 2 different people. There was no comparison to the scanning done in the ER. And the only thing I can think of, and, went and met with endocrine and spoke with multiple radiologists, is in those 3 weeks, I had drastically changed my diet. I'd gotten on some good anti-inflammatory things. I started, drinking a lot of aloe and bromelain to help with, tissue repair. And that was the only difference. And that drastic inflammation change in those 3 weeks was like we scanned 2 completely different bodies. It was crazy.
I believe it for sure.
Yeah. So that started my path. And,
What were you, I know you were a practitioner before, but what were you specializing in
yeah.
before all of this?
So yeah, my background, so my original training is primary care, but then I went into orthopedic surgery. That was where I had spent most of my career, was orthopedic surgery. And in 2017, I opened Low Country Wellness Center. Actually, I opened Charleston Physical Medicine, which was a more holistic ortho practice. And in 2018, when I got sick, I said, listen, if I can't get the care that I want with my alphabet soup, then nobody else is getting the care that they want. And so I closed down Charleston Physical Medicine and I reopened as what it is now, Low Country Wellness Center. And I've never looked back.
It's incredible. And I'm so grateful to have this conversation with you because my autoimmune stuff started, I'd say I started to see things happening in high school, really. And I did go to a holistic doctor and he specialized in like muscle testing and it was all like food and energy based and all of this. And so he took me off of gluten, sugar, dairy, all of that. And I did that for, I don't know, while I was home in high school. And my mother and father could help me doing all of this. And then I went to college and I played basketball in college on a scholarship. And I just like gluten-free is not a thing in 1997 when I went to high school, when I went to college. It certainly was not. So I ended up not continuing that diet, but it was always in the back of my head. Like, I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be doing this. And then after many, many years later, I did end up with an autoimmune disease. And I often think, had I had I been able
You
to,
can't.
I know, but it's
You
in my
can't.
head. Like, had I
Yeah.
been able
Get it out
to,
of your head. Because you never know, right? We have over 100 autoimmune diseases. We have names for about 50% of that. And so whether it's the one that you know about or it's the ones that you didn't know about, you likely wouldn't have changed the trajectory.
yeah. So I often think too, sometimes, does it matter the name? I know it
No,
does
nope,
for,
not
like,
really.
if you're treating it, well, maybe we should take a step back here. For some people who don't know what functional medicine is, want to give us a quick little
Yep.
roundabout of, I mean, I think a lot of people have
So,
heard it, but don't
yeah,
typically
I'm going
know.
to
Yeah.
tell you, I can't stand the term functional medicine. I refuse to acknowledge it. I don't use it. I correct everybody. Because when you talk about functional medicine, you're saying that anything besides that is dysfunctional. And it's crap. That's not
That makes
accurate.
sense to
Okay.
me.
So I like either foundational or root cause, right? Let's drill
Okay.
it down to the why this went wrong in the first place, right? So that's that. So the difference between traditional allopathic medicine, I call those the box people, right? Because they can only see what they can fit inside of a clinical guideline box.
Mm-hmm.
They forget that the boxes are made of human beings. And so in the root cause world where I live, we drill it down to the why. But why did that happen? Why did you get an autoimmune disease? Where did that come from? Was it, childhood things? Was it diet? Was it environmental exposures? Why? Because your body didn't just go haywire spontaneously, right?
No.
There were precipitating things that led us to that. And in the allopathic world, they just look at, oh, you've got a headache, here's a pill for that. But in
Mm-hmm.
the root cause world where I live, we go, but why do you have a headache? When did it start? What else was going on in your body at the time? Well, maybe we need to track that back to even further, right? And figure out why did that go wrong? And so that's really the main difference, right? In a very rudimentary nutshell, that's the main
Yeah.
difference.
And to follow up on that a little bit, and this is, I know the answer to this is going to be all over the place, but is there often a big like, is there often a cause that you see, like it was this, it
Yeah.
was that, or it was this, or it was a combination of them all? Like, what would
Yeah.
you say is a primary
So
cause?
when I teach, because I teach practitioners how to treat the medically complex, we talk about a system I created to kind of identify that. It's called the treatment triangle, right? And in the treatment triangle, there are 3 legs to it, right? There's the pathogen leg. That's, the stealth infections, Lyme disease, EBV, CMV, the list goes on and on, COVID, all the things like that. Then there is the toxicity leg, and that's environmental toxins, mold toxicity, that type of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
parasites and things. And then there's the trauma
That's
side of
where I'm
it.
going with that. Yes.
Yeah. And so that's where we've got to get into what we call the big T traumas and the little T traumas, right? Because your body stores every single thing that has happened since you were in utero. And so it might not be something that happened in the last 5 years of your life that made your body get ill. Crap, it could be something that happened when you were 3 months old and you have no cognitive knowledge of it whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So generally it falls into one of those buckets, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can see in my own case all 3 ticking boxes.
Yeah. And that's the norm.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely trauma. I mean, who doesn't have trauma? But there's definitely environmental things. I can remember as a kid, I broke a thermometer and I was playing with the mercury,
Mercury.
like
Yeah.
not knowing that. And I vividly remember, my mother's a nurse and she freaked out when she saw me doing that.
Call the hazmat team.
you know, and that was probably like 1987. So what did you do? You just
Yeah.
cleaned it up and went on about your day. And I often think, like, I wonder if that had anything to do. But I think
Yeah.
I don't think it was one specific thing for me. I think it was
It's accumulation of things. Yeah.
for sure.
It's
Yeah,
stacks. And that's what I tell everybody. It's not one thing, it's the stacking of them. And what really sets the difference between how our bodies respond now, because you could get 2 people with the same illness and you're going to get completely different responses because it goes back to what was your childhood like? What was that treatment triangle complexity when you were 5 years old, when you were 2 years old, when you were 12 years old? Because that set the tone for what your adult body can handle. So,
I can imagine people, like, I get a little emotional thinking of that. The emotions that come out of people when you have this type of treatment
yeah.
must be pretty intense. This is a calling.
Well, it is. And the traditional practitioner isn't going to get into that treatment side, that
No.
triangle of the trauma piece of it. But because for me, like you, trauma was a huge piece of it, I chased that one deep. And so I actually became a certified trauma hypnotherapist because for me, that was the best relief that I'd ever had. I felt the best after I unloaded so much childhood trauma, and I did it without having to relive it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, why would anybody ever want to go through that trauma twice in their life?
Right.
Why would we not all want to do it under hypnosis when I can come out of a session and be like, yeah, that happened, and it's Monday, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
I feel like I need to say, because my mother listens to this, I had a wonderful childhood. My sister passed away when I was 7, so that was where that comes around. And I know I had an amazing childhood, but we did have some things that happened.
Yeah.
So Mom, I love you. Yeah, so I can see where all of that comes into play. What does treatment look like in your office then? You start with labs or do you start where
well,
you
we
let
start
the
with a
patient
complex
take you?
history. Yeah,
Okay.
we start with a complex history, right? And we start talking about that treatment triangle right away because at any given time, right, the leading leg of it is changing. And so, when you talk to me today, you might be stuck in fight, flight, or freeze. And I go, all right, well, nervous system is leading. So I got to get you out of that trauma side of it, right? I can't do anything physically until I can get you out of fight, flight, freeze. Or, I see you another time and the pathogen arm is what's leading. And I'm like, okay, well, we got to go and we got to look at, what pathogens do we need to tackle or whatever. And so it's very fluid. I always tell patients we could get 100 sickies in a room and I'm going to have 100 different treatments and 100 different reasons to do it. And so when you get into the medically complex where I live, treatment it's a N equals 1, right? Every treatment plan is unique to that patient.
And it's never ending. I feel like what I've come to learn after 16 years of this is that there was a long time I just was fighting so hard to put this into remission, to heal myself, to kind of have the perfect outcome. And I was living my life in a way where it was like I was afraid to do things. I was afraid to put the wrong thing onto my body. I was afraid to have too much stress. I was like, this is no way to live. I've come to the realization that with this disease, I might go into remission. I might have a miraculous healing someday. I hope I do, but it's not my end goal. My end goal is to just learn how to live with this so that I don't have to have this failure if I don't, because I'm an athlete.
Well, it's a fluid thing.
It's a fluid thing.
Yeah.
There's peaks and valleys.
And I tell patients, flares are going to happen, right? You're human. Flares are going to happen. The goal is to get your internal terrain so strong that the flares come and go quick and they don't knock you out, right? That we build up your resources so heavily that you can get the common cold and have it be a 4 or 5 day thing, right? You can get the flu and only have it knock you out for a few days instead of a few months or a few weeks, right? That's the goal. It's to increase that background, kind of quality of life stuff, right? When you're somebody who's been chronically ill for a long time, you get that, man, cold's going around, like I better live in my bubble because I don't have weeks to be down. Right?
Down. Yeah. Yeah.
And, I can tell you as somebody who, I didn't even tell you that, found out that the cause of all of my stuff ended up being Lyme disease and all of the infections that come with it. So when I treated that and cleared that from my body, let me knock on lots of wood right now because I don't know the last time I actually was sick. I mean, it's been years.
So interesting I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and I'm exposed to viral people all the time, every day.
So literally your job. So I am interested in Lyme because I grew up in the Northeast. I moved to Charleston 7 years ago.
I heard that.
I know it's still in there. It comes out. I can bury it, but it comes out every now and then.
Little Massachusetts twang in there.
Yeah, exactly. Part of my fear back then, I had 2 babies and I was scared to death. We lived in 2 acres and there was deer running everywhere. And I was scared to death to let them outside because I thought I knew so many people. It's an epidemic up there, really, Lyme disease.
It's an epidemic across the whole world, just so you know.
Well, that's
every state in the country is epidemic.
Because I don't hear about it as much here, but my holistic doctor up there used to say to me, just don't think you're going to get away from it just because you're going to Charleston.
Yeah, no, it is here. I actually have a very large Lyme practice. That's mainly what I do these days. Lyme paired with the medically complex.
So can you touch a little bit on the testing you do as opposed to the testing you would do at an allopathic or at your PCP for Lyme? People don't want to hear that test is different. And I know
it's very different.
Yeah,
it's very different. So the root cause world, we actually get down to, into the pathogens. And so I'm a little different. And I tell everybody, I don't need to have the name for all the bugs that you have. The treatment is the treatment. And, if you've got the money, then great, we'll test. If you're that brain that needs to have data points in order to justify why we're doing what we're doing, beautiful, I will test you. But if you're that brain that just says, I want to feel better and I don't care what name it is, then let's just jump into treatment. Now, when you talk about testing, the traditional test is the Western blot. You can get that at any lab, right? LabCorp, Quest, everywhere. The problem with the Western blot is that when the Western blot was created, it was created as a surveillance test, not as a diagnostic test. It was also created when America was facing a massive Lyme vaccine. And so the 2 strains of the vaccine would have given everybody as positive bands on the Western blot were removed from the American Western blot, because the theory was that we would vaccinate 100% of the population in the early 70s. And that every single person would be positive for bands, 34 and 39. And so in America, bands 34 and 39 are taken out of every Western blot test that we have. Wow. Which happens to be the most indicative 2 bands of Lyme disease, which is why, if somebody has a positive Western blot in America, you have to have 5 active bands in order to qualify as a positive. Now, the misconception is that the bullseye gave you Lyme. Mm-hmm. The bullseye meant that your existing Lyme is reacting to a new bite. Right? The other misconception, as you said, is I was worried about my kids getting exposed to deers, in the deer tick. Yeah. Lyme is spread, as are these other stealth infections, from every vector that bites. Mosquitoes, gnats, no-see-em, horseshoe flies up north, right? Anything that has the potential to bite you and bite somebody else is spreading all of this stuff, right? And then as moms, we pass it gestationally. Right? We call that horizontal transmission. And so as a mom, I unfortunately birthed 3 Lyme positive daughters who went on to birth Lyme positive grandbabies. And that's really when my grandson was born and spent some time in the NICU with what I knew was neonatal Lyme. And MUFC Sean Jenkins laughed at me and they said, that's not real. Even though I went with a stack of literature that proved this is what neonatal Lyme looks like. I said to my daughter, you know what, let's get him out of here. And then Gigi will fix him on the other side. Let's get him stable enough to leave the hospital. Mm-hmm. They're not going to buy in. They're too boxed, right? Yeah. They're too boxed into their hole. So I think, the big thing that we're going to see coming, thank goodness for the Lyme Roundtable that happened back in December or was it November? I forget, but it's the first ever HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, that had the first roundtable meeting on Lyme disease from a government level. And that night, a new Lyme disease website got added to the HHS website. The roundtable came out and said, there will be no more gaslighting of these chronically ill patients. No more. Stops today. And more acknowledgement of these alternative tests, right? Because we know that the Western blot is a wrong test. It was never meant to be a diagnostic test. It was meant to be a screening and a surveillance test. And so, immediately Kennedy said, we're going to put some resources to that. Do you know, and this is where it gets crazy. You can see I'm so passionate about Lyme, right?
No, I am too.
That, HIV research, let's just talk about that, gets hundreds of thousands of dollars per year per American citizen. Lyme research gets on average $15 per person of research. Lyme disease affects more people than any other illness that's ever hit our planet. How does that make sense?
It doesn't make sense. I mean, don't get me started on what they spend their money on up there. That's crazy. Mike, how about, let's talk a little bit about why some people's autoimmune diagnoses are in fact actually, like, some people will often say to me, have you ever been tested for Lyme? Because maybe you don't have rheumatoid arthritis and maybe you really do have Lyme. So they mimic each other some way.
They do. Yeah.
And
so if you look at well, if you look at the latest research, there's been some very overwhelming evidence that supports that MS is Lyme, lupus is Lyme. Parkinson's is looking like it's going to be Lyme. RA was actually how the Lyme got found, so to speak, up in Lyme, Connecticut, was a group of children around that island all started presenting with what looked like juvenile RA, when in fact, when you look at imaging and you look at x-rays, Lyme arthritis is a very different appearance. And so they called it juvenile RA for these kids when in fact it actually was Lyme arthritis. But that's how we finally got the name for what is Lyme disease. And unfortunately, Lyme disease is one bug, and we tend to throw this whole cascade of illnesses into the name of one bug. So that's the other thing that those of us that are Lyme providers have been reached out to by the CDC to help us come up with a better name for it. And so we're kind of, leaning towards something that's going to be like vector-borne syndrome or something like that, that more appropriately justifies it. But what you'll start hearing, especially since the roundtable, is there's going to start to be some reclassification. So when we talk about lupus, for example, we talk about Lyme lupus. We talk about, MS, we talk about Lyme MS, right? Let's acknowledge what it really is, right? It's Lyme RA. That's when, I've got a patient who came to me in palliative care because nobody could figure out what was wrong with her. For 10 years, she'd been sick. She was in her 50s. And she said, they told me I have what's called seronegative RA, meaning it never tested positive on image or on blood work, but on imaging, she had RA. And I said, no, I'm going to call crap on that one. I said, what you have is Lyme disease, and nobody knew what it was. And so they threw you into this pigeonhole disease and put her on the biologics for RA, which made her feel horrible. I said, let's humor me. Let's just do a quick little Lyme screening test. And sure enough, her numbers came back off the chart. And I was like, and you do not have RA, you have Lyme disease. It's a different beast,
Yeah. Interesting. What do you think that you said your practice is mostly dealing with Lyme disease at this point?
My personal practice is.
Okay. Yeah. So do you think that, not to put a number on it, but 60% of people who have an autoimmune are classified the wrong way?
Yes. Yeah. I think the number is much higher than that. Yeah.
Yeah. My point in that question is really because people don't know where to turn. They get these diagnoses. Yeah. You're saying what I hear all the time from people is that nobody's treating me as a whole. They're treating me by this disease. It's not that I have this problem and this problem, but one is endocrine and one is joint. So no one talks to each other, and they don't know where to turn. And what would you, if someone came to you newly diagnosed, obviously you would recommend they go to you. Is there a resource? They go to you first, but is there books, resources, websites, anything that we can direct people to?
There's an abundance of information out there.
Yeah, which is
Project
overwhelming.
Lyme is probably a good, exactly. And that's what I warn patients. I said, hey, listen, actually where I tell people to start when they're considering this journey, I have them start with a documentary. I said, it's going to open your eyes. It's going to piss you off. It's probably going to make you cry. And I want you to start with that. It's called The Quiet Epidemic. And I tell everybody, please buy it from their website and don't buy it from any of the streaming services, because then the money goes to Lyme research. If you buy it from the streaming services, that money doesn't go back to the Lyme research. So please just go to thequietepidemic.com, download the $5 movie there, and watch it. And The Quiet Epidemic is going to be that kind of first eye opener into the gaslighting that Lyme patients go through. But it's going to shed this light that the typical Lyme patient, I call them my Lymies, take 9 years to get to me, or to get to a diagnosis. 9 years of illness before they finally find somebody like me who goes, wait a minute, here's the big picture. 100% you have Lyme disease, right? And that's what I call it, Lyme because Lyme never comes alone. Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the bug of Lyme disease, I've never seen alone. He always comes with friends. And so I've always called it Lyme just because it's a better representation. But when we look at the diagnostic criteria to diagnose somebody with Lyme disease, people are under the misconception that I have to prove it with a test. And it's what we call a clinical diagnosis. You have to meet a certain number of symptoms, of clinical criteria. Well, lo and behold, any autoimmune disease is one of the criteria.
Okay.
So you
could
tell
treat me for Lyme without...
Exactly.
I'm not one of these people. Maybe I was 16 years ago, but I'm not that person anymore that I need to know, checking all the boxes. Because what I've come to learn is putting a name on it makes you no different than you were yesterday.
Exactly.
It doesn't...
Let's just make you feel better. Why does it matter what it's called?
It doesn't matter. But people think diagnosis, medication, treatment, healed.
Yeah.
New
I
people
wish
who
it
are
worked that way. I
newly
wish it
joining.
worked.
Yes, people who are newly into this autoimmune world, who are trying to get
Yeah.
answers, who have no experience, don't know anyone who's been through it. They really genuinely think they're going to go to the rheumatologist, they're going to
Yeah.
get a diagnosis, they're going to get a medication, and they're going to be better. And it's really hard for them to come to the realization that that is almost never, probably never the case. That it's,
And that's because our American healthcare system has programmed everybody to think that, right?
yes.
So when we step away from that Main Street allopathic system and we get into the root cause world over here on my side of the street where we go, hey, listen, I don't have to answer to Blue Cross. I don't have to answer to Medicare. I don't have to answer to Medicaid. I get to treat you the way that you need to be treated. You want to duke it out with, Blue Cross, that's on you, but I'm not going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make you feel better.
Right.
And, when I don't have to answer to the insurance companies, that frees me up so much. And I know, I see it all the time in the Facebook groups. I hate that, they don't take insurance. And I'm like, you realize that we wouldn't be able to care for you the way that you want us to care for you if I was bound by their rules. Right? The only reason we're able to do the things that we're able to do and get people into remission and get people feeling better is because we get to walk outside of that allopathic box.
That is very true because, and I tell people when they're first, I get a lot of people, this is what birthed this podcast, is a lot of people are referred to me or, my friend has something like that or whatever. And then they just want to talk. They just need to feel like they're not alone. And I tell them from the get-go, what I'm taking, you're 16 years away from trying. The insurance company is very regimented on what I'm not even really sure why we have doctors once we have the diagnosis, because go to get your labs done and the insurance company tells you what you're going to take and when you're going to take it and when when you fail it and what you take the next one. It has nothing to do that's a really sad situation. So I 100% understand and can confirm what you're saying is true, that insurance companies muddy the waters.
They're practicing medicine. We're seeing insurance companies practicing medicine. And I write back to insurance companies all the time when they send me the little letter that says, hey, you didn't put your patient on this. And I said, when you have a license to practice medicine and you are their PCP, you may give me your opinion.
Period and done. Yeah. I think what holds a lot of people back from talking to people like you is the financial part of it, because it is a reach for a lot of people. I was talking, my cousin, her situation is double-fold. Her kid is dealing with a lot, and she has an autoimmune thing too, and they have the means to turn over every single leaf imaginable, and she's very blessed and lucky to do that. But I know there's a lot of people out there that don't. Do you have any recommendations for those people? I mean, I always think it's worth the initial visit anyways, because you're judging and you don't know. There could be a million plans out there, but
And there's a lot of ways to go about it, right? But one of the reasons that it's more expensive when we get into this, root cause world is our expenses are so much higher, right? Mm-hmm. When I was a regular primary care person, I paid, maybe $1,000 a year in liability insurance. But because now I live in a root cause world, I pay $30,000+ a year in insurance. And the only thing that changed is I live outside of the box now. That was the only thing that changed. So patients don't understand that there's a lot more liability on the provider when we step out of the allopathic mainstream world, right? And so we have to cover that, right? I'd love to give my care away free every day. It doesn't work, right? Well, then I can't give it,
No.
And so there are lots of us that do, low cost consults, or we'll do what we call like a chart review. Hey, I'm not going to treat you as a patient, but if you want to send me all of your stuff, I'll send you back some info on things, some things that, kind of jumped out at me that I think are worth exploring. And so there's a lot of options out there. It's just a matter of, you got to start somewhere.
Mm-hmm. And I've learned not to talk to my rheumatologist about things I do outside, because not that they fire me as a patient, or they just don't care.
Well, and they don't understand, nor do they have the time to learn it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I sent a patient recently who insisted on going to rheumatology because they had told her she had lupus. And I said, you don't have lupus. So I sent the referral at her request. I said, I don't like this. I'm going to do it because you feel like you want it.
Yeah.
And I sent all this information, including journal studies on the Lyme lupus connection. And what I got back was, well, we're going to start her on this med, and that med. She doesn't want to do any of that because you've put into her head that, this is what the problem is. And I said, I didn't put anything into her head. I literally gave her the literature the clinical evidence that supported what I'm saying. You're just pissed off that it's refuting what you're telling her, which is go on all of these big drugs that are going to cause 100 other issues.
Yeah.
When all she wanted to know was, how do I get out of a flare when I'm in one? That's why she went there. How do I get out of a lupus flare when I'm in one? And he said, I have no idea. Go back to Dr. Penni, that sort of thing. I don't know. Beautiful.
Do you ever treat, or do you see a value in doing both Western or allopathic,
Well, I tell everybody, the true integrative world where I live is where we get to blend East and West, right? When I'm in a trauma, absolutely take me to that level 1 trauma center and you do the life-saving things that I need you to do. But when I'm dealing with a complex multi-system autoimmune disease, I'm not going to go the allopathic route. You can't help me. I fired my endocrinologist way back in that day, right, in 2019, because I went to him and I had done a lot of research and I'd done a lot of testing on my adrenal tumor. And he rolled up in my face on his stool and literally yelled at me and said, you make me feel like a moron. And I put my hand up and I said, no, you make you feel like a moron because you can only see guidelines and I'm a human being and you don't know what to do with us. I don't fit into any of your boxes. And for those of you that are listening to this, I'll share quick side note on why I had to fire him. My case presentation from an endocrine perspective was so challenging that I was the case presentation at the 2018 National Endocrine Society Conference. He came back to me from this conference with all of the powerhouses in the endocrine world and said, nobody could figure it out. We're all stumped. And that's when I went, okay, y'all can't help me. You can't help me. You wanted to give me a medicine for a disease you don't think I have, but then you flipped and said, but you don't not have it either. So we don't know if you have it, but it has a 50% risk of death. Do you hear the things that you're saying out loud? Does that make sense? And so I fired him that day and I said, I'm sorry, you can't help me. And he said, well, you need follow-up. And I said, not from you. I'll manage it on my own and you will never lay eyes on me again. And that was that. That was, that was the day that I said, this is it. If I don't take charge of this now, they're going to kill me. I've got to get a handle on all of this.
Well, let me ask you this. For about 5 years, I did holistic treatments only. And probably 2 years of that I shouldn't have, or I should have found something else. Like what I was doing worked for about 3 years. And now I have a lot of damage from the joints and stuff that and the thing that really flipped the switch for me, and I was never really able to get back, but doing what I was doing, was stress. And I hear all the time from mothers and women in general that all of their problems started with stress.
Sure.
I mean, that was the catalyst. Like all of these symptoms were happening, and then I was having, my child was sick with cancer, my mother was dying, lost my job, whatever it is. And I was never really able to get fully back to it. So it's probably because I never really addressed the full cause of it. Although I feel like I turned over so many rocks trying to get there. Lyme testing 16 years ago was not much on the radar when I was doing all of that. So maybe that's something I need to explore a little bit. But can you talk a little bit about stress and what that does?
Yeah, that's, it goes back to, when we're stuck in that autonomic nervous system, right? When we're stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze, that deteriorates the body at such a faster rate. And so, one of the first things we talk about, when I sit with patients is, what do you do for stress management? What do you do for sleep every night? Truly, the number one thing. I can throw all of the herbals and supplements and healthcare. How's your sleep? The number one most important thing you can do for your body is have quality botanicals, and we can use food as medicine, but if you're not sleeping, nothing else I do matters. And so we talk about, what does self-care look like for you? How do you prioritize that? We do some simple things. I love telling my teenagers, like humming. People take for granted humming. It is a powerful way to help calm the body's stress responders down. I said, every time, especially to my girls, every time your thighs hit that toilet seat, your mouth better be humming.
Oh, do you have tools of people to deal with stress or autoimmune? It's like maybe 2 or 3 big ticket items here.
I think there's some really simple things that we can do to help manage our body's stress response. The number one most important thing is sleep. If you're not getting quality sleep with good, adequate dream recall, can't prioritize that any higher. That is the number one thing. Second thing is controlling that autonomic nervous system. And so there's some great free things that we could be doing. We don't have to go and buy all the gadgets. Everybody has, the ability to hum. Humming for 2 to 3 minutes a day can pull the body out of fight, flight, or freeze. EFT, or tapping, the emotional freedom technique, is another really great and free resource that we can all do. Again, helps kind of pull the body out of that, panic mode that we get in, right? That scarcity, oh my gosh mode. So those are really simple ones. Breath work, you cannot minimize breath work. There's so many different breathing techniques to, some are to calm the nervous system and some are to activate this. Another easy one is just rebounding, right? I love rebounding. And the research shows that just a couple of bounces a day on a mini trampoline, doesn't have to be anything, super, super expensive, it is enough to open up your body's lymphatic channels. So yeah, let's do some really simple things so that your body can calm down. So the first thing, prioritize sleep. I don't care how aggressive you need to be. I don't care if you're the bad person because you're like, hey, everybody, I got to tap out. It's 8:00. I got to be asleep by 9, right? Like, you have one life to live. And if you're not sleeping well, you're not going to have a long life to live. It's that simple. So sleep is the priority. And then, I follow that sleep thing up, like I said, right away with how many mornings do you wake up with dream recall? Because if it's not the majority, then you're not getting quality sleep. Dream recall is important. It tells me how deep your body got into restoration mode. And then I tell all of my kiddos and my teenagers, which happens to be one of my favorite populations, if your thighs hit the toilet seat, for the girls especially, then you're humming. That way I know you're humming at least 2 minutes a day, right? You don't have to go and do all the tapping where people might look at you. Hum. Doesn't have to be loud, but every time you're sitting on the toilet, you're humming.
And
you're going to see changes quick.
The deal with humming, tell us why that's so important.
So humming has been shown to help the body pull out of autonomic dysfunction. And it's that autonomic dysfunction that we get stuck in that creates all that reactive oxidative stress to the body that then goes and targets our organs and our tissues and our joints and the brain. And so we've got to break the cycle, right, of creating reactive oxidative stress. And so humming is a simple way to do it. Tapping is a simple way to do it. Sleep is the preferred way to do it.
Sleep is, as a perimenopausal 47-year-old woman, I've always been prioritize sleep because I've had to. With this disease, I can't. I have to sleep. If I have to go to bed at 7:30, it's good night, guys.
Yep.
Get yourself to bed. I'm done. But lately, it's been, I don't have any trouble falling asleep. It's the staying there that's the problem. Yeah. But
and that tells me that your hormones need to be fixed, right? That's a simple one.
Well, it doesn't feel simple. Yeah. None of it, and that's part of my problem is that I'm so sick and I'm so sick of my health. I'm so sick of it.
I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired,
I'm sick and tired of it being like a thing every single day. And I know this is like doctor's appointments and insurance companies and, blood works and this and that and this. And now I get to go find a whole nother group of people to help me. That's where it's just, it becomes a lot. So, and since I've been in Charleston, I have not had any more holistic treatments. I haven't really found anyone. I know that there's some out there.
Here we are.
I know there's a reason for everything in this world. So I'm super excited. I was looking at your website earlier. You want to tell us where people can find you if they're in the Charleston area?
Yep. So Low Country Wellness Center, we are located in West Ashley, right on Sam Rittenberg. You can find us online at lowcountry-wellness.com.
Awesome. And if you wanted to schedule a first appointment, how far out are you booking? This is questions people always ask.
I think my staff told me this morning we're only a couple of weeks out.
Okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And you're in West Ashley. Awesome.
Yes.
All right. Any message you'd like to share with someone who's newly diagnosed with anything or struggling to get there to the diagnosis?
Yeah, find your people.
Yeah.
Right? Find your people. Find a support system. I used to offer a autoimmune support group open to the community. I ran it in my office. And I think the most I ever had was 2 people show up. And I was like, I know there's more than 3 of us that have autoimmune in Charleston. Like, so find your community. You're not alone and you're not crazy. You're not crazy. I promise you, you're not crazy. You're not just sick in your head. They're just missing what's on paper. And so, hum, tap, whatever, sleep, right? But find your people.
I agree. Finding your people and don't find your people online because they're a very negative group of people involved in all of these autoimmune disease groups.
Yes.
And they can't help it. They're there because they're
desperate.
They're desperate. They're in a flare. They're wherever they are, but those are not the people you need right now. The people you
Yeah.
need right now are your neighbors and friends who quietly
Yeah.
suffer too. That
Exactly. And that can
they do.
connect you, right? You can say,
Yeah.
oh, hey, Susie, my friend Kim is going through the same thing. Let me connect you and Kim, right? And then you get to talk to Kim, and maybe Kim says, oh my gosh, here's what's worked for me, or here's who has been able to help me, or, whatever that looks like. And now you start to build that system.
Right. And don't put yourself last, moms. You have to put yourself first.
This is like the airplane. I tell all of my patients, right? What is the first thing that, that safety talk on the airplane says? Put your oxygen mask on first. And this is no different. Because if you're not taking care of you, you can't take care of anybody else. And now you become a patient. You become the one that everybody needs to take care of. And we're moms. We're not good with that,
No, we're not.
Tell you that firsthand in the last, 6 weeks, not being able to take care of myself. I'm like, ah!
It's terrible. You can't pour from an empty cup, as they say. So
exactly.
We need
Correct.
to prioritize ourselves, and I don't know. Finding community is always helpful, and I hope this helps bring people closer together. I'd love to chat with you again. This has been amazing.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your time. Before we wrap up today's episode, I just want to say thank you for being here and spending this time with me. If this conversation resonated with you, it would mean so much to me if you'd follow or subscribe to the Autoimmune Mom podcast wherever you're listening, and take a minute to leave a review. It really helps other moms who are navigating autoimmune disease find this space. And if you know of another mom who might need to hear this message, please share the episode with her. You can also connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at the Autoimmune Mom podcast, where I share encouragement, resources, and up-to-date updates on new episodes. And don't forget, you can download my free Autoimmune Mom Survival Guide using the link in my bio on my socials. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and I'll see you next week at the Autoimmune Mom podcast. Take care of yourself, Mama. Your health matters too.